Hello friends, this video on transport in plants part 18 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. So with this we have ended our discussion on xylem transport. Now we will talk about phloem transport. Now, as I have mentioned before, phloem are those conducting tissues which help to transport the food prepared in a plant from leaves to different parts of the plant. The food which is prepared in a plant is by the process of photosynthesis. And what is that food? That food is in the form of sugar, that is glucose. So before we talk about the transport mechanism of phloem, let us quickly have a recap on the structure of phloem. Now, unlike xylem, most of the phloem cells are living except phloem fibers. So let us see what are the different elements which together make up the phloem. We have sieve tubes, which are tubular structures. You can see here, these sieve tubes are the tubular structure which actually help in conduction. So these are tubular cells with perforated walls. On both the ends, they have sieve-like structures called sieve plates. So this side also and this side as well. So both ends will have walls with perforations called sieve plates, and otherwise it will be a tube-like structure. Companion cells which will be present in neighboring to the sieve tubes. So these are the companion cells. So they regulate the metabolic activities of the sieve tube elements. Next is phloem parenchyma. These are the normal parenchyma cells which help in storage of food. So that is phloem parenchyma. So they support the sieve tubes and also store compounds like starch. So they basically help in storage. And finally the phloem fibers, which provide mechanical strength, and they are dead cells and they just provide the mechanical support and strength. So here also, if you see like how in case of xylem you had xylem parenchyma and xylem fibers, similarly here you have phloem parenchyma and phloem fibers. For conduction in xylem you had tracheids and vessels, and here for conduction you have the sieve tubes and the companion cells to regulate their metabolic activities. So now we will see how exactly this transport take place. So how does phloem transport? The most interesting question here. Now, when we talk about the transport, it actually follows a mechanism called the pressure flow mechanism, or a mechanism where the substances are transported from source to sink. In case of xylem, the source of water was soil. So water always needed to be transported in one direction, that is the upward direction. But here that is not the case. Leaves are present at all levels. So from leaves, you need to transport the food downwards to the roots, and you also need to transport it to the upper branches which are present. So you need to transport it in both the direction, upward, downward, as well as laterally. So in all directions you need to transport. So phloem transports sugars by a mechanism called pressure flow hypothesis. What is pressure flow hypothesis? This says that the sugar will flow in a direction from high pressure towards a region of low pressure. So that is called a pressure flow hypothesis. We will talk about it in detail. So before we talk about it, we should understand that the transport will always take place from source to sink. What is a source? Source is that region where the food is synthesized. So in this case, source are the leaves. So source synthesizes food. So here leaves synthesizes food by the process of photosynthesis. So leaves are the source. When you talk about sink are all those regions which utilizes the food or which stores the food, which needs that food for their own survival. So when you talk about a sink, roots are the sink, the branches are sink, stems are sink, the flowers, fruits, they are all sink. So here the food needs to be transported from source to the sink. This is a bidirectional transport, as I mentioned before also, because here you need to transport it both below as well as above, because leaves are present everywhere and you might have a branch above this as well. So the food needs to be transported in all directions. So what is that food exactly which we are talking about here? That is called sap, and sap is nothing but sucrose and water. Now by the process of photosynthesis, the food which is prepared, that is glucose, but that glucose being a monosaccharide is then converted into a disaccharide, that is sucrose. And sucrose when mixed with water forms the sap, and this sap is basically transported by phloem to different parts of the plant. So the sap contains the sucrose, and sucrose is nothing but made up of glucose. So that is how glucose reaches the different parts of the plants. So now let us try to understand the pressure flow hypothesis. What happens in a pressure flow hypothesis? This is also known as mass flow hypothesis, because here also the movement of the particles occur in mass. That is why it is called mass flow hypothesis. So now let us try to understand the concept of pressure flow hypothesis. Now we already know that we have a tube of xylem, a xylem tube rather, which carries water. So now we also have a phloem tube which carries the sap. Now we have a source which is the leaf, which are the leaves here, which prepares the food by the process of photosynthesis, and we have sink where we need to transport the food materials from. Now the first step is to transport the food from the source into the phloem. Now how does that happen? That happens by active transport, because the phloem already gets in too much of the food from there. So whatever newly prepared food is there, that is also actively transported into the phloem. Now once the sugar is actively transported into the phloem, what happens? The sugar concentration here increases. Now sugar concentration increases would mean the solute concentration will increase. Now once the solute concentration increases, that means the water potential is decreasing. So now here on the other hand, in xylem there is too much of water, so the water potential is high. Here the high water potential is high, and here the water potential is low. So what will happen? Water will start diffusing in from xylem to phloem. So water will start to enter here. So now you will also have water here. So water will also start to enter here. So now what do you have? You have sugar plus water. So you basically have a sugar solution. Now when so much of water start entering into this area, pressure is created. You all know, right? When more and more water start to enter inside a container, it exerts pressure on the walls of the container. So the similar thing happens. A high pressure area is created in this region. So as a result, this sugar solution start to move downwards from the region of high concentration towards the region of lower concentration. It is not about up or down. I mean, I'm just showing it like this, but this tube is there even upward as well. So when the sugar and the xylem enters like this, it creates a high pressure here. So this is also low pressure, this is also low pressure. So they can move in either ways. So let us suppose it moves towards the lower, it moves down the pressure gradient, that is from region of higher pressure towards region of lower pressure. Now as it moves down towards the region of lower pressure, wherever it finds a sink, now this sink can be a root, it can be a flower, it can be a meristem, apical meristem, whatever it can be. Now as it keeps moving down, whenever it finds a sink, the sugar is actively transported into the sink. So the sugar will actively go there, so the food is transported to this area. Now what happens to the water? As soon as the sugar moves out, the solute concentration decreases here. When the solute concentration decreases, the water potential will increase. So again, water will move from high potential to low potential. So what happens? Water moves back into the xylem. So this is water. Again, this was also water. So this also moved by diffusion or osmosis. Here also this moved by diffusion or osmosis. And what is this? This is sugar. Again, here also this was sugar, and this sugar was actively transported. Even here also the sugar was actively transported to the sink. And then this phenomenon keeps happening over and again. And this is how the sugar is transported from the source to the sink. Now this sink can be multiple sinks. Here, just to explain you, I have given this example of root, but it can be anything else. It can be a flower, it can be a fruit, it can be a branch, it can be an apical meristem, a lateral meristem, because all of them need the food. So it can be anything. So that way this entire pressure flow hypothesis continues, and this is how phloem transports food to different parts of the body, to different parts of the plant. Now let us have a quick summary of whatever we have discussed in the pressure flow hypothesis. The first step is that sugar should be actively transported from the source to the phloem. So this is how the sugar enters the phloem tube. Now since the concentration of sugar is increasing, the water potential in the phloem tube will reduce. Therefore, water will diffuse from xylem to phloem, because water moves from high potential to low potential. Now once water enters into the xylem tube, now you have sugar plus water, that is the sugar solution. Since so much of water entered into the phloem tube, it will create a high hydrostatic pressure. Because of this high pressure, the sugar water solution will start to flow down the pressure gradient. So sugar gets transported along the pressure gradient. Wherever it finds a sink, it is actively transported to the sink. Only sugar is actively transported to the sink and not the water. So what happens to the water? As the concentration of sugar decreases in the phloem tube, the water potential increases. So water diffuses back from phloem to xylem. So these steps together constitute the pressure flow hypothesis, and they control how food has to be transported to different parts of the plant. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more videos, attempt free online test, get free study material, find tutors and mentors. Thank you once again.